start recording. So today we're doing Siman Kuf Aleph, which you probably know. I hope. And
Kashrut 101.
Right, Kashrut 101, exactly. It's interesting, and one of the pages that we have is page Kuf in the Gemara Chulin. I always think of Tzadichet and Siman Tzadichet. One of the main pages is page Tzadichet in the Gemara in Chulin. I always wonder if that's a coincidence. We're doing Kashrut or Tarovot 101, and we're actually discussing Tarovot where there is no bitul, right? Where you have a Haticha, RaUya, LehitCHabed. Now, the basic idea is that without getting, we will talk about what is a Haticha, RaUya, LehitCHabed. But we know that there's such a thing as bittul of even, we didn't discuss this maybe so much directly, but there's like dry and dry. What is the halacha l'maaseh? If you have like pieces of meat that are mixed together normally, what would we say? Is it
Rov.
Noam says rov, right?
Yavesh b'yavesh.
Yavesh b'yavesh, dried pieces, batal b'rov. So if those pieces, so what provide, now if we say there's such a thing as Haticha, RaUya, LehitCHabed, what do we have to say about that statement about rov? We have to qualify it and say it's only talking about pieces that are not fit to be honored. Now there's that whole halacha that we have in our heads that rov is enough to mavatel pieces has a new light to it, which is that we look at a new way that it really is only I'm tempted to say small pieces. So it's only to say pieces that are not Haticha, RaUya, LehitCHabed. Maybe small pieces. So where does this come? Where do we learn this from? So let's turn right away to that Gemara in the Chulin on page Kuf, and you all probably saw it, but it's based on a Mishnah and Gemara in Kuf. The Mishnah, I think, is beforehand. Usually it is. But where is that? Well, it doesn't matter. The Gemara starts off like this. It says, it quotes the Mishnah, "V'ken haticha shel nevela is not batel." The Mishnah is quoting things that are not batel. And it says, "V'tibatel beruba," let it be batel beruv. Berov. In other words, like we said, like the halacha that we know. And we say, "Ha nicha lamanda amar kol shedarcho limanot shaninu." So, el lamanda amar et shedarcho limanot shaninu my iklavim. So we don't have to get into exactly that machloket. It's not important. Really, what we're saying is, why isn't it batel? And we say, "Shani chaticha ho'il v'RaUya LehitCHabed ba lifnei ha'orchim." So there is our basic law. If it's RaUya LehitCHabed ba lifnei ha'orchim, then it's not batel. We don't have much of a definition of what that is, but it's fine. Now, there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that I asked actually Lexi to read for us, to prepare for us. So let's turn there, Ayin Dalet. And this is a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Ayin Dalet. And we'll see if it's different, really. So go for it, Lexi.
1 second, just pulling it up. Okay, so we're starting with like this Mishnah at the very top of Ayin Dalet, Amud Aleph. So il asurin v'asurin b'kol shehen yain nesach v'avodat kavavim v'orot levuvin v'shor haniskal v'egla arufa v'tzipore v'tzora v'ser nazir, der chamor, basar b'chalav, ve'seir ha'mishtalech, v'chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, hare elu asurin v'osrin b'kol shu. So the Mishnah gives this whole list of things that are usher in and of themselves and are also like make other things usher in like the tiniest amount. And so we get what should I call it? We get yain nesach, we get like idols, we get these torn hides, which is supposed to be indicative, like torn over the heart, which is a way apparently they would like kill animals for idol worship. We get the shor nisko, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these are kind of like distinct items, which is what the Gemara is going to get at. But the question is like, why is the Tanna Kama listing these, right? Like, what is it? What is the like thing that links all of these together? So the Gemara starts with
also
Tanna
no.
Maika Kashi.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Never mind.
Right. So our first question is like, what is like linking this whole list? So Tanna Maika Kashi. Right, so our confusion is that like there's certain categories these might seem to fall into, but there are seemingly obvious exclusions from those categories. So if like we say, oh, these are mostly like distinct entities, kind of like countable entities, then why don't we also get Haticha nevela in this list? And if we're
which would also be Oseir b'mashu. In other words, in a sense that if it was a dry mixture and you had one of these, one piece was important, it would alter it, like we just saw.
Right. So the answer, and then we also have the question of why do we not have, if these are all Isurei Hana, then why do we exclude like Chametz B'Pesach? So Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, v'Tema Rabbi Yitzchak, Nafcha, Haritana Tarte Yitzle, Devar Shminyan, ve'Isurei Hana. So our resolution is that the Tanna Kama had both of those criterions. So the Tanna Kama only listed things that were both like a distinct countable object and in Isur Hana within this list. And so now we have like a question about other stuff that should have been included. So litne egoze perach, rimone badan, the devar shminyan v'Isur Hanahu. But we have this whole like list of things somewhere else where it says certain things that are always like chashuv in a devar shminyan. And so amongst those are like these nuts of perach and the pomegranates of badan. So if these are orla or kilei hakerem, then these are also isurei hana. So they should meet both the criterion for this list. So why weren't they included? Hatana le hatam, harui le orla, harui le kilei hakerem. The answer is that the Mishnah already taught about those there in orla, about how the ones that are orla make other things orla, kilei hakerem, same deal. So they weren't included here because we already mentioned them, even though they do fit those criteria we just mentioned. So now we have another suggestion. So we also have this idea that like loaves of a Baal Habayit are another one of these significant entities that's never batel. And if it's chametz b'Pesach, then it's also an Isser Hana. So why wasn't that included in this list? And their answer, man shmata da'amar le Rabbi Akiva, hatana le hatam Rabbi Akiva, mosif af kikarot shel Baal. So like who did you like hear who taught you that like these loaves are significant? It's Rabbi Akiva who teaches there in Orla, like Rabbi Akiva adds onto the list kikarot shel Baal. So seemingly the answer is like, well, that's not everybody agrees that kikarot shel Baal Habayit are one of these significant entities. Like the Chachamim even give like a standard list, and Rabbi Akiva adds these at the end of that Mishnah. So that's like you could read that as saying like that's not why they're included here. B, you could read it as saying like, oh, well, they're already included in that Mishnah in Orla, like we just said. And then finally, after we've gone over the question of things that should have been included, but now we're getting to the end of the Mishnah. So hare elu, the mute mai. So what's the like statement at the end summing this up? Hare elu, like coming to exclude. The mute devar shminyan belav isurei hana. Yinami Zim'uta Isur Hana Villa Devar Shminyan. So this comes to exclude things that only meet one of the criteria we just mentioned, things that are only countable but not in Isur Hana, or vice versa. So particularly for our topic that we're dealing with here, this is relevant to the question of nevela, right? So if nevela is a devar shminyan, but it's not an Isur Hana, then does that mean, is Gemara saying that that means it's not oser b'kol shehu? Or is it just saying, oh, well, that's why it's not included in this list, but it is and that's, I think, a less shot reading, but I'm already being influenced by people trying to resolve those.
So give a reading of our Gemara that comes into conflict with the Gemara in Chulin. How would you explain the Gemara?
It's the first way I said it. The I think probably the simpler reading of that last line is if you see this Hare Elu at the end of the Mishnah, that's literally saying Hare Elu Osrin, Asurin, but Osrin B'Kol Shehen. You could easily read that as saying anything that's not listed here is not Osrin Asur or Asur B'Kol Shehen. And so at the end of this Gemara, where it says the Hare Elu is coming to exclude things that only meet one of these criteria, you could easily read that as saying something that meets only one of these criteria is not Asur B'Kol Shehu.
Mm-hmm. In other words, if the Mishnah, I would say if the Mishnah is listing the things that are Asur and Osur B'Mashahu, the list should be complete. And if the list, and therefore let's assume the list is complete, and yet it's missing, and yet it's telling us things that are not Asur B'Hana'ah, shouldn't be on the list, then apparently those things are not Osir B'Mashahu. In other words, is this Mishnah have any halachic significance? If it has any halachic significance, it's telling us all the things that are Osir B'Mashahu because of their shape, or because of their size or something. And if it's missing something, then that must not be Asur B'Mashahu. So why is it that in the Gemara in Chulin it said that Haticha nevela is Osir B'Mashahu? Yeah, Joel.
I think it goes even further than that, where it says that it has to be that
criteria.
What was that?
You were saying it gives criteria for what is
exactly
be Osir.
And our Gemara in Chulin says that it seems to imply, at the very least, forget RaUya LehitCHabed, if it's Darkosh Limanot, or if it's Devar Sheminyan, let's call it that. Devar Sheminyan is Asur B'Mashahu, right? Because that's its solution to Haticha Shel Nevela. It doesn't say anything about Hana'ah there.
Right. So the question is Hana'ah a factor? So it sounds like in other words, we could, if we just had this Gemara in Avodah Zarah, we might say that Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed is no din. So there's no such din. There's no such din of that being not batel, because it doesn't fit this criteria, this criterion of being Isur Hana'ah. In other words, there's no Isur Hana'ah of nevela. So therefore, there's no din of Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed unless, and then we could explain that Gemara in Chulin as maybe talking about some kind of nevela that was Asur B'Hana'ah, right? But if we didn't have that Gemara, then certainly we would just say we would never come to the din of Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed being Asur because it's not Asur B'Hana'ah. So I think I asked you Lexi, to also talk about the Tosfot. I don't know if you have to read it inside, but maybe just say what Tosfos' answer is. Unmute yourself.
Right. So Tosfot brings up the contradiction that we just mentioned, that this seems to be cholek on what we said in Chulin about how a piece of nevela is never batal because it's devar shminyan, or specifically Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. And this despite the fact that it's not an Isur Hana. And so what they're saying is the Tanakama is only listing things here that have these two characteristics, but it's not saying that these are the only things that are Osir B'Mashahu. And they give another example of a case where something like this happens, right? Where they like give a list of things that meet certain criterion and they like exclude other things that don't meet those criterion, but that doesn't mean they don't have the same deen. So they basically come down on the side of saying nevela is like never batel if it's a Haticha RaUya. And it's just not included here because like it's not what the Tanakh is trying to teach at section.
In other words, he's just trying to give us, he's sort of like a memory device. He's just trying to give us a list. He's grouping, for before the exam, all the things that are Asr B'Hana and also Asr B'Mashu. And he's making a list of those things. And he's not trying to say anything else about other possible things that are Asr B'Hana or other possible things that are Asr B'Mashu. He's just giving you a list of a certain category. Of course, there's a problem with this reading, which is the first line of the Mishnah. What is the first line of the Mishnah? Elu Asurim, Asurim, B'Kolshu. Doesn't mention anything about Isser Hana. The first line just sounds like he's tricks us. He sounds like he's giving us a list of things that are Asur B'Mashu. So, but
right, to understand that, that's what you have to read the Gemara as saying, as asking not what are the things that fall into this category, rather saying like what are the things that this particular Tana is interested in listing right now.
Which I do think
no.
fair...
I would say it a little bit differently. Can anyone say it differently? Yeah.
No, I mean I think it's like actually a fair presentation of what the Gemara is saying, right? It's like Tana, Ma'ika Chashiv. It's like, what is inspiring this Tana to group these things together? Like the Gemara's first question doesn't seem to be getting at this like, oh, it doesn't necessarily have to imply that these are the only things that fall into this deen. It's like the Tana's giving us a list, and like what is he trying to teach us with this list? And I think like you could.
The Gemara has sort of delved into the mind of the Tana and figured out why he gave us this list. And it's because these things have these two criteria, but they're maybe right. And I think that's a fair reading of the Gemara, like you said. But
I do think it's slightly harder with the end of the Gemara. I think the first section of it, that's like an extremely straightforward reading of it. And I think the ending, it's a little more dachuk to read it the way the Tosfot are. But like lema'ute mai. Because generally I feel like when we say lema'ute mai, we're saying like lema'ute for like a halachic nafkamina.
No. It's because he never specified what his list is. The hare is telling us what his list is. Now, he never specified what the criteria are for his list. What is chashiv? No?
That's not how I read that. Because we just said that above. That's what we just talked about. So I read like
no, but we didn't have. We didn't have any word, but we didn't have any words in the Mishnah that taught us that.
So you're reading that as just like an organic continuation of what we just said, as opposed to kind of like another tiny section of the Gemara, because I was reading it kind of as another tiny section of the Gemara. Like we determined, like the way I first read the Gemara, especially before reading this Tosfot, was like up until there. It's kind of what was the Tana thinking about when grouping these. And the lema'ute mai, I feel like generally when we use that language, like most of the times I've seen it, like I said, I feel like it's often for like a halachic nafkamina, like lema'ute blank from this deen that we just specified. And people can disagree with me if they've seen more lema'ute mai. That's just been my general experience.
No, but even so, I can say it's lema'ute. I agree with you what you're saying, but it could be lema'ute from his rishima, not a din. Elu. This is all there are in my list of things that have these two criteria.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing that like you can read it that way. I'm just saying that I think the Tosfot's reading is actually quite intuitive with the first part of the Gemara, and I think it's a little more difficult with that last bit. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just think it's like not necessarily the most straightforward reading.
Right. I mean, right. And like I said, it turns the Mishnah into just a list of things that have these two criteria, but it's not teaching us a new din, for example. And it's not even listing all the things that are either of those things. Joel, you want to say something?
It still teaches the din that if you have those two categories, you are oser b'mashu. It just doesn't teach you about things that only have one of those categories, whether or not they are oser b'mashu.
No, it doesn't teach you any din really, because it just teaches you what things are in this category, have these two qualities. In other words, there is such. Right.
You don't think it's automatic if they have the two qualities though, that they are Oser B'Mashu?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
who teaches us that?
No, what two qualities? The two qualities are they're Oser B'Mashu.
Well,
One of
it's
them
just
is
things that are
one of
Asur
them is that they're
B'Hana.
Osher B'Mashu, and one of them is that
No, I
they're
think-
Iser Hana.
I thought one was Isur Hana, one was Devar Shebinyan.
Yeah. Okay, wait a second. Yeah, you could be right.
Yeah, I think if I get what you're saying correctly, Joel, it's that like this is, you could read this as saying, this is teaching that whenever something has these two criteria, it's definitely Osir B'Mashihu. That doesn't mean there aren't things that have only one of these criteria that can't be Osir B'Mashihu, but it's not all things that are exclusively Devar Minyan or exclusively in Isser Hana.
Exactly. But which is a little bit hard because Devar Shebinyan seems to be in general, other places in the Gemara seems to take that as that is Osir B'Mashihu. But
Again, I agree. Yes, I said you're right. He's definitely saying it's just black and white, Devar Shebiminian. So, but still, I still think you can read it as saying these are other things that I'm excluding from my Mishnah.
oh wait, Rav Nachum, we lost you there, I think.
I'm just saying you can still say that statement. I mean, again, is these are the things that I'm excluding from our Mishnah, things that are not both Devar Shebiminian and. But I have to know that there's a thing called Devar Shebiminian, which is not Isser Hana'ah, and I'm not telling you anything about those things. I'm not telling you anything about those things. They may or may not be Batel B'Masher. And there are things that are Isser Hana'ah, and I'm not telling you anything about those things. They may or may not be. But these things are Isser Hana'ah. So right, it's a little bit strange, because the Mishnah then is not, like I said, it's almost like not teaching me anything, because if in fact, things that are just one of those things are also us. It could be theoretically the things that are just one of those two qualities are also Asur B'Mashihu. And Adana just didn't list them here because he's not interested in listing those things. So in a sense, it turns the Mishnah, like I said, it's like a memory device. It's just a list of things to remember what things have these.
In some ways, the Gemara plays out where it's like, well, what about cases of like certain of Orla? Like, well, that's just listed somewhere else, right? It's just like this didn't make our list.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So the Rif does not learn it this way. The Rif learns it. We're not going to look at the Rif, but we'll see the Beit Yosef quotes mentions the Rif. And actually, let's go to the Beit Yosef. But the Rif learns it as a machloket between the two Gemaras, and he goes with the Avodah Zarah Gemara. We're not going to look at the Rif because
the Tosafot on Chulin also learned as a machloket.
Yeah. Okay. You want to take us there?
Well, I don't necessarily think we need to look at it, but it's just worth noting that there is another Tosafot that says that they are in machloket and we're going with Chulin, as opposed to the Rif who says they are in machloket and we're going with Avodah Zarah.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to the Tosafos in Avodah Zarah, which
the Tosafot in Avodah Zarah ultimately goes with Chulin, but he tries to make a consensus position, which the Gemara in Avodah Zarah is not actually disagreeing with the Gemara in the Gemara in Chulin. Gemara in Chulin straight out says the Gemara in Tosafot is disagreeing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Joel, yes,
without attempting to resolve.
I remember looking it over the summer. I don't remember it anymore, but.
All right, let's go to your thank you now for that. That's very important because that means that the Tosafos and the Rif agree essentially. So let's go to Siman.
They agree that there's a machloka. They don't agree about which side we choose.
Yes, exactly. Okay, go to Kuf. Look at the first Beit Yosef, and look where it says. By me, it's like the fourth wide line in the Beit Yosef Aleph, and it says Venera. I don't want to read it all. After he quotes the Rashbam, and then there's a parentheses. B'divrei Amatchil Mai V'chen. You see that? If you want to search for it, search for Venera. Yeah, you guys got it?
Are you starting the alpha p shemi divrei harif nira there?
Oh, I'm sorry, in the Bach. I'm sorry. Thank you. I meant in the Bach.
Ah, okay.
My mistake. In the Bach. Venera in the Bach. Where it's, yeah. You found it? It's like the fourth wide line in mine, and it's after parentheses. It's after parentheses of Diver Hamatchil Mike Techen. Yeah, tell me if you got it. Andre? No?
The first few words.
The first word on the line, but well.
Could you give like roughly how far into like?
Oh, how far into it? It's
because the wide line.
Towards if of Aleph, it's towards the end, kind of.
Okay.
We might all have different versions. That's
Yeah.
Right. But in Aleph,
I don't have an Aleph.
Yeah.
Well, you have a searchable version, or you don't have a searchable version?
I can search with my eyes.
It's, I don't know, about 100 words in. Venera. Here, I'll read it. Maybe you'll find it. Venera de lefi de bechaticha ika tana beperek batra de avodah zara de tarti ba'ina. So we have this tana in avodah zara that says you need two criteria. Shetihei Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. The Isser Hana, and it has to be Isser Hana'ah. Thank you, Andre. And Isser Hana'ah. V'katav Ashri b'perech Gida Nashet Sof Daf Kuf Samachtet Siman Lamed Shekach Sover Rav Alfas. That's all. That's all I wanted. Just that he's saying that Rav Alf, that the Rif is holding that you need two criteria. You need both. Not that we're going like the Gemara in Chulin, like Tosfot, but that we're going like the Avodah Zarah. That he's reading the Avodah Zarah, that it is teaching us a halacha. It's not just a thing to divide things up neatly in interesting ways, but it's actually teaching us a halacha. We need those two things. Now, the reason I didn't want to look at the Rav Alfas is because if you look at it, it's not clear. It's not easy to prove that that's what he's saying. But that's what the Bach is, and that's the way it's understood by everybody. So I don't want to go into exactly how they prove it. Okay, so that's just for that. So let's read the tour a little bit. Maybe Joel, you want to read a little bit?
Sure, why not? Start with Haticha RaUya.
Yeah.
All right. Haticha RaUya dina kebiria sheina betela. Ve'afilu hi asura behana'ah karinan RaUya kivan she'im titbatel tiye muteret utiye RaUya LehitCHabed. All right, so it's like biria, right? It's not batel. And even if it's something that's a sur b'hana'ah, right, you might think, we'll get into this probably in the Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch, right, it's not RaUya LehitCHabed because it's a sur b'hana'ah, so why would you ever serve it to somebody kind of thing? You can't even do that.
Right. It's a kind of logical conclusion with, right. In other words,
yeah. So
it's like if you see a sign on the wall that says, don't post signs on this wall, you say, well, better take down that sign.
But that's gonna I'll be in a loop all day after that one.
Actually, there was a sign like that in where I teach, one place where I teach, where I teach, and And it was just after the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Mann, was Israeli, it was there, and he's like, I think in economics he got for game theory or something, and he was there, and we pointed out. I think I pointed out that sign, and we came, and I told them in I forget who said whatever. We came to the conclusion that rule only applies once. In other words, the sign it's not a logical statement; it's a sequential statement. In other words, you put it at the. In other words, from the moment this sign is there, now other things can't be put up. Anyway.
When it went up, it was allowed. That's yeah. So the same, right? The idea would be that you could, because something's asur b'hana, can be batel, right? We don't have a general rule. So that if it becomes batel, now it becomes RaUya. So that's the
exactly. In other words, let's point this out. So in other words, it's asura b'hana. So what hana can you get from it? So therefore, it's not RaUya. He said no, because once if you wouldn't say Haticha RaUya, then this thing would be mutter, and you need it, and you have hana from it. By the way, this is like the opposite. He's sort of saying what we thought was a criteria. You have to be RaUya. You have to be Isser Hana'a in order to be not batel. Now he's saying you might think that you wouldn't be in that case, and he's saying no. So that case, and certainly cases where it's not Asur Hana'a.
Aval. Tama batel kedim birya, but like we saw with birya, right? If you just have the tam, not the mamash, that is batel. So you have, I don't know, a really nice piece of steak to give to somebody. If just you get the tam of it, that could be batel b'shishim, let's say. So
right. So this is this idea that we've seen many times, that you can divide a mixture that's wet, it's pieces and wet liquids, and you can analyze it from both perspectives. The pieces are going to be not patel, but the sauce will be permitted. In other words, you have to remove all the pieces, and the sauce would be permitted as long as there was 60 times, and you could even count the pieces that you removed as helping to create the 60. But then you have to remove those pieces, and all those pieces are asur.
Yeah.
Okay, read on.
Bedavka she'isura machmat atzma. Right. This is where it has to be an isur from itself. We're going to see, like, for instance, as opposed to like the dam that's in meat, for instance, before you salt it. Aval im nesra machmat shekibla tam isur, or this is another case. Velo hayu bashishim levatlo afilu misha sover shenechshevet kenevela ein la din chaticha RaUya. So if something absorbs the taste of nevela, for instance, and it is a piece itself that would be RaUya, it doesn't fall into the category of not batel, even to those people who say chanan for that.
Right. So wait. So what's the difference between? So wait a second. You're saying even if you would say chanan, what don't we say?
We don't say that it's not batel, the shishim. Or rov, actually, excuse me, because we're in a yavesh be'avesh case. So,
in other words, you might say chanan. The whole piece is asur. Haticha nase nevela. It's a nevela, and if we hold,
and it's a haticha RaUya,
and it's a RaUya, and we hold chanan b'shar isurim. Not just by basar b'chalav, we do in fact say it would be not batel, but by shar isurim. Well, don't we treat them the same if we're, Ashkenazi? So
here's the distinction right here. It seems to be
right. So here's the distinction. So it's coming out. It's like we have this law that says treat shar isurim as chanan, and then we keep pushing back against that law. And you say, well, it doesn't apply here. It doesn't apply there. It doesn't apply. In the end of the day, where does it for sure apply? This idea of chanan.
I think it's the amount that you need to be batel the thing at this.
Right. When calculating shishim, that's it. That's pretty much it. In other words, we're sort of remembering again that chanan is not really an ikar din. So if it's just a belia, then we don't say that the whole haticha is considered a nevela, even though we say nevertheless what chanan is. We say really it's just, we remember that it's really just a belia in it, and therefore it is batel.
Well, I have a slightly different read. I think he's still saying Hanan is happening here. So meaning
Of course, I
if,
mean, in the sense that you'd need 60 against it.
in the sense that you need 60 against the whole pot now, not just against the piece, because Hanan did happen.
No, we're talking about a piece that, like a piece of kosher meat that a drop of blood fell on it, and now the piece is usher.
I was just now taking the next step in which that piece then falls into another pot, right?
And if that pot has 60 against it, so that pot is mutter.
Right. But my point is, if the pot doesn't have 60 against it, right?
Oh, if the pot doesn't have 60 against it, then again, we would need 60. If all those pieces would fall, we need 60, but we wouldn't be aser b'mashahu.
Correct.
And we wouldn't.
It's like going off of the rules of
agree
Hanan that we already have. Like, we know that we might need 60. We definitely need 60 if you think Hanan is a thing against the piece that it was balua. And then you'll need 60 against that if it falls into something else. But regardless, like, it's able to be batel as long as there's this shear.
Right, as long as they, right, exactly. We're assuming that there's 60. All these cases, we're assuming that there is 60. And we're just asking, is it anyway not batel because of this din of Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, which I didn't say, but is obvious is a rabbinic law. So that's very important to point out.
I totally agree with that. I was just, I guess, pushing back a little on the notion that this din somehow undermines Hanan. It doesn't.
It doesn't. It just points out again that Hanan seems to only be about numbers, about how much do you count? Do you count when you're counting 60? What do you consider?
It undermines the naming of it, that it's something that's really made into nevela. That's what it undermines.
Now, on that point, I want to point out that there's a machlochus between, or that's understood as a machlochus between Ri and Rabbeinu Tam on this question. That Rabbeinu Tam is understood, and I say it that way because you might be able to read it differently, but Rabbeinu Tam is understood to argue with Ri and to hold that Hanan really turns it all into Isser, not just some kind, whereas Ri is saying it's just as far as counting, just as far as bittul. And the Rabbeinu Tam holds no. So it would actually come out, we don't paskin like Rabbeinu Tam, but it would come out that according to Rabbeinu Tam, it would be a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. In other words, he equates it exactly to Basar B'chalav. Those are in a couple tosfos that are very long tosfos in Chulin, that machloket. Okay, so if you look in the Beit Yosef, this time the Beit Yosef actually, he says the smag in the middle of Bet. He says the smag v'sefer truma. V'nitba'er b'divreihem she'atam lefi she'ein ha'isser sheba RaUya LehitCHabed. Now, that's the rationale for why. In other words, he's saying what's going on. Haticha na'aseh nevela means that this whole piece is usher, but it's usher because it's got some balua in it. But that balua in itself, that's and we're forbidding the whole piece because it contains this balua. But that balua itself isn't RaUya LehitCHabed. Oh, the piece is RaUya LehitCHabed. That's the rationale. So let's go on. Lifnei orchim. Afal gav de mashma beperach batra de avodah zara de chatichat basar b'chalav eno betela kishruyah LehitCHabed. So wait a second. Basar b'chalav is also, why is the meat forbidden? Because it's got some balua milk in it, and that milk isn't fit to put in front of a guest, so it should be mutar also. Shani hatam. The kevan shenitbashlu ze im ze v'chozer hakol keguf echad shel iser. He says, no, there is one iser. The milk is just as usher as the meat, and the meat is usher now, because you cook them together. And derech bishul asra Torah. Now the meat is usher essentially. Masha ein came b'shar isuri. Okay. Let's go back to the Tur Gimel. Joel, you want to read again?
Sure, why not? All right. Uvinyan Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed katav Adoni Avi Harosh Zal Rabu Hadeot Yesh Omrim Shetarnegolet Benotzata V'chein Haticha Chaya Kevan She'ein Ru'ina Ata Lo Chashivi RaUya LehitCHabed. So the overwhelming set of opinions the Rosh is writing about here say that a bird with its feathers still and a piece of wild animal meat, I guess, because it's not yet cooked, right? I mean not wild animal, sorry, raw meat is sorry.
Raw, yeah, there you go.
Raw meat and a piece of raw meat, because right now they're not ready. You can't present, I mean, unless you have weird guests, right? You're not gonna feed them this stuff. Then that's not RaUya LehitCHabed. You have to do some work in order to make it in that state. I added a lot there, but
No, you have to do a lot. You added that you have to do a lot of work. The Haticha Chaya might be different. That maybe you don't have to do a lot of work. By the way, this is a very lenient opinion. If you say Haticha Chaya, it means that the only time that we're talking about Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed is like the chef in the kitchen is made at the wedding, has made all these manot of steak, and he's put them on the plates, and he just realizes that one of them was from the kitchen next door that was not kosher, and he doesn't know which plate, but they're all like on the plates, cooked steak, ready to go. That's what we're talking about. But
Wouldn't
if it's
it
just
even need to be like that you cooked the piece by itself? Because if it like was cooked all simultaneously with the other things, wouldn't it have been batel while it was still chaya?
yeah, well, actually, right. We talked the explicitly that's discussed. I forget where. Maybe someone remembers, but that's explicitly discussed. That yes, if it was batel before, then that's it. It stays batel. So yeah, if you would have cooked them raw, and now say, oh, now they're cooked. Well, they were batel already in their raw state.
Like,
so it would only be the case.
It would have to be that I like cooked this piece by itself, or
That's what I said.
And then it fell into something else.
No, I said no. My case, the wedding. That was my case. We got mixed up. You're at the wedding, and the chef took one piece from the kitchen next door, and he doesn't know which one. So they were all that one was cooked in the treif kitchen. This one was cooked in the kosher kitchen, and one of the pieces that he's got in front of him. Or I'll give you another case that could more likely happen. You are having a communal barbecue, and everyone brings their meat. Bring your own meat, and you're allowed actually on the same barbecue grill, as long as the meats don't touch, to cook kosher and not kosher. So yeah, because right, as long as so you're cooking your non-kosher and your kosher, and you forgot which one. Nobody can remember which one is the kosher one and which one is the not kosher one. And you can say, so I'm thinking about different ways of looking at that. But one way of looking at it is, now I've got a cooked piece, and one of them is treif, and I don't know which one, and they're all mixed together. I don't know which one is which on the grill. You could try to argue, well, wait a second, they were raw when it first got mixed up. But I would say no. When it was put down, you knew which one it was. It got mixed up only after it cooked. In other words, you knew when you were putting it down what it was. So yeah, so this will be a very lenient opinion, this Chaya.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Vafilu be'mashlema betela ad harshni bashla RaUya litem lifnei oreach lechabdo. All right. So even a whole animal, right, until it's ready to be served, ready to be plated, essentially, it's like at that point, it's still batel. So if you mix up the treifa, I guess, with the the non-treifa goats or something like that, it can be batel.
Wait, how do you read that? Filu behema shlema betela ad la'achar shnitbashla v'RaUya. In other words, if it's chaya, obviously it's batel. But if it's cooked, then what?
Even
Then
a full,
it's
not
then
kind
it's
of
not batel. A
like
full goose.
Yeah, you like put it on you cooked it on a spit, it's a full thing. It was ready, you roasted it, and then, but it's not yet cut up into pieces to serve to people. That's not real LehitCHabed. So, and can be batel.
Wait. No, I don't read it that way.
Oh, you
I
don't?
mean, that's the way I read it maybe previously, but now as you read it so beautifully, a different thought entered my head. And that what he's saying is, afilu behema shleima, which is raw, betela, ad la'achar shenit bashla, until you cook it. And then it's cooked and RaUya LehitCHabed. So he's saying that a whole animal would be a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed if
Even
it's
as
cooked.
a
If it's cooked, and if it's the kind of whole animal that you might put on a table. Nobody's going to bring an entire goat and put it on the table, but it could be an entire goose, like on Thanksgiving. You might bring a whole turkey to the table. If it's cooked in RaUya liten lifnei oreach. Well, is it oreach or orchim?
I never trust the Torah to be that accurate with plural and singular, truth be told. So it's
yeah, you're probably right. So it might be that that this opinion is just talking about a raw animal not being batel. I mean, a raw animal, yes, being batel, and that a cooked full animal might be, depending on what cooked animal it is.
I think the Havamina is that you could say, well, we said that Haticha Chaya is not RaUya LehitCHabed, but maybe it's a full animal, like you show, like there's the thing where you show the guest the animal you're about to cook, kind of thing.
Well, we have this thing. We have a law that is that live animals are not batel. Mm-hmm. Running around sheep. If you have, let's say, a sheep of, I don't know, Avodah Zarah that ran into your pen, and you don't know which one is the Avodah Zarah one, so the whole group is now usher, because a live animal is not batel. So what he's saying is, yes, but if it's been slaughtered and it's raw, and it is batel. And now you can ask me, what question should you now ask me? What if at the time it went in, it was not batel because it was live? But then I went, I don't know, intentionally, by accident, doesn't matter, I don't know. It got slaughtered. And now it's ready, it's now raw. Do we say, well, at the time it wasn't batel, so it's still not batel? Or can we say, no, well, now it's batel because it's raw? As we saw before, that the initial moment is what counts. So does the initial moment count here? Or is it possible that at the initial moment it was not batel, but now that I did a processing of it, it's batel?
I feel like this is a case where the Ramah's favorite thing, which is no dahatar would feel relevant. Like if you realize that there was this usher sheep mixed up before you shechted them, and then you went and shechted them, I feel like it would make sense to say no, it's not batel now that it's a raw sheep. These were all usher and you just were over and decided to shecht them. Whereas if it's you had this mixed up, it got mixed up while they were still alive, but you didn't know that one of them was a treifa or whatever it is until after you shechted them. Then now that it's a big raw carcass, it can be batel, which I think also makes sense logically, right? If we see about what we're trying to essentially punish people for or stop people from doing again, that if you don't want somebody to be able to have realized they have a bunch of usher sheep, shechted it, and then be able to benefit from the fact that they did something explicitly forbidden.
That's exactly
whereas if they shechted them thinking these were all fine, and now they find out that one of them was a treifa, they weren't being explicitly problematic when they did this action. So it makes more sense to be okay, fine, it's a dead animal now, whatever.
Wait, so what are you saying? You're saying that once it's shechted, it should be batel or not?
That once it's shechted, if it was only noda, after they're shechted, even if they were mixed together while they were alive, then it should be batel.
But if I knew it the whole time,
before they were shechted, then it shouldn't be batel.
but if I knew the whole time, and I was no da before and I was no da after, then it should not be batel, you're saying. So this is this. Can anybody tell me where to look to see the answer to this question? So you look in Gimel in the Beit Yosef. He brings the answer to this question. So I'll read it. Unless, well, I'll read it. Gimel. Uboina, you see where it is? Yeah, everyone has it? Gimel in the Beit Yosef, not the Bach. Asher, you with me? Okay, so he says like this. Uboinan, he's quoting now. Tell me if you can hear me. If you can't hear me, sometimes I point my head down. Uboinan, sorry, Uboinyan, Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, Katav Adoni Abi Rosh Zal, Rabu Adev. V'yesh Orim Danagol B'notzata, V'ken Haticha Achaya. Kevan She'en Ruim Ata, now they're not ready. Lo Chashivi RaUya LehitCHabed, Ad Kol Sheken Chashivi Tfei. Well, we didn't read that in the tour, but what he says there in the tour is that the Rosh argues on this and says, what are you talking about? If it's big, it's even more RaUya LehitCHabed, because you can LehitCHabed many people with it. And then he quotes where it is. Besof Perak Gida Nashe. That's where you can find this Rosh. Siman Lamed Vav, right? The Rosh of Simanim. Behevi Ra'ayot L'Devarav. Katav Sheken Mashma B'toch Divrei Rabbeinu Shimshon Shepiresh Sham Ri Bereish Perach HaTaravot Zachim V'hu Katuv Sham B'Tosfot Shelanu. Okay, fine. V'Rashba. So that's all. He's just saying where to find this opinion. He just now told us where to find that opinion. Fine. V'Rashba B'Torah Habayis Kasa. That's that's in my footnote says it's in the Torah Tabayat Aroch Bayit Dalid Shar Aleph. Katav Stam Kedivrei Haomrim Haticha She Gedola Yoter Midai Lo Chashiva RaUya LehitCHabed Shemeachar she'ein darkan shel bnei Adam Liten ki yotze ba lifnei ha'archim eino chashiva she'omedet he eino chashiva, it's not important she'choshev she'omedet he lachtov, because you need to cut it first. In other words, he's saying that a big piece of of a half a cow you wouldn't put on the table. What about a turkey? Turkey also you need to cut it. I was saying that a turkey, maybe according to the first opinion the Torah brought, that if it's cooked, it would be RaUya LehitCHabed, not be batel. But it kind of fits the lashon of the Rashba. Well, wait a second, you got to cut it still. You're going to cut the turkey at the table and give a person a big piece. In the end, this all comes down to the minhag makom, whatever is customary. If it's considered, it's two things. It's whatever the minhag makom is, but it's also a question of what the gezerah is. Was the gezerah on pieces that are served, or was the gezerah also on a whole chicken that you bring to the table? What we don't know what the gezerah was. But his lashon is that since you still have to do the act of cutting it, it's not called a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, right? Again, in the Rashba, he says, I'm going back a little bit. Shehi gedola yoter midai lo chashiva RaUya LehitCHabed. Why? Why is not considered RaUya LehitCHabed? Shemeachar she'ein darkan shel bnei Adam liten ki yotze ba lifnei ha'archim. Because the custom of people is not to put this large piece in front of anybody. Eino chashiva, it's not important. She'omedet hi lachtov, because it's still destined to be cut. and to become the size that you would put in front of somebody. Does everyone agree with my reading? Yeah, okay.
There's also like a really, when the Rashba says, right, right, he's all of a sudden kind of stipulated this is based on the custom of how people serve things.
Definitely.
In Texas, RaUya might be a different size than it is in somewhere else. I'm being a little flippant about it, but
I would say even more. Nouveau cuisine might be a very small piece. It might be RaUya. I can't stand those restaurants.
if you look in the Shach and Taz, they mention like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, they're very emphatic about it.
All that time and place. Like I think they really get that.
Yeah.
That cuisines are different, and yeah.
No, but what about? Here's my question that they don't answer neatly, which is the turkey question. If it is an honorable thing to put a turkey on the table, it's put on the and yet it's not honor. Nobody would put on the plate a turkey. So what is the status of that? Is a whole turkey RaUya LehitChabed because I would put it on the table and I would carve it in front of you? Like I was once in a restaurant in England and they brought out a fish and then the woman's, and she had a little plate next to the table, like a stand, little table next to the table. She said, "Shall I bone it for you?" It was a sole or something. And I said, "Sure." So in other words, she's not going to put on my plate a whole fish. Whereas in Greece, they put on your plate a whole fish. So, but that's a serving. Either way, it's one serving. But what about this turkey case? I don't think that's, in other words, the Shach and Taz is talking about the fish. Maybe a whole fish is RaUya LehitChabed in Greece, but not in England. Maybe but what about a whole turkey, where nobody would put on a plate a whole turkey, but they would put slices. So it depends so according to the Rashba, it's omedet lachtov. It's still destined to be cut, and therefore it's not RaUya LehitChabed.
Right. I think the question up until now has not been a question of custom. The question up until now has been a question of something else, of like.
Right. Well, he does use the word nohagim. He does use that word. Anashim lo nohagim.
If they nice to be RaUya LehitChabed, that the Rosh says no, but other people say yes.
All right, let's go on. Vevi rayot. And he brings a nice raya. Mideparik perich hatarovot, v'libatel beruba. And they said, let it be batel in rov. Umishani mishum the balei chayim lo batle. So that was the case of the sheep, of the Avodah Zarah sheep running into the pen. And they say in the Gemara, let it be batel. And the Gemara says, no, it's not batel because it's a live animal. And it says alma. So what is the Rashba learn? That's alma shchuta dikavte batil. Then I learned, therefore, that if it would have been shchuta, it's only because it's a balei chayim that it's not batel. But if it would have been slaughtered, it would be batel. And wait a second, a slaughtered animal you could serve to many people. So why is it not RaUya LehitChabed? Because you wouldn't serve it in its present form. So he has a proof that a large piece is not considered Haticha RaUya LehitChabed against the Rosh. So we have a nice little machloket here between the Rosh and the Rashba. Rosh saying, we didn't read it in the tour, but the Rosh says, the bigger it is, the better. The more LehitChabed. And the Rashba says, I have a proof for you from the Gemara that if it's slaughtered, of course you could even answer. You could answer and say, well, that is not really LehitChabed because it's just shchuta is one thing, but being taking the skin off and having the innards removed and salting it and having it all ready, maybe now it would be even though it's very big. In other words, and we're going to see that idea, maaseh gadol. Maybe that Gemara is not, doesn't suggest that because it would be still chaser maaseh gadol. It would still be lacking a large processing, right? But that's the Rashba. So again, the Rashba is saying simply that that if it's very big, it's not a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, and the Rosh is saying it is a RaUya LehitCHabed, even if it's very big. The comments? All right, let me read just to the end, not to the very end, because I want to answer with a question we talked about before. V'ken katav gam ken haranzal, period. V'smak, it's hard to read sometimes, the Beit Yosef, because when you list two people run after the other, you don't know what he's saying. So you have to read, V'ken katav haranzal, period. V'smak katav stam she'im ha'behema im hatzemer, or of im ha'notzah, ein ze karui RaUya LehitCHabed ubatela. He just says it stam. He just says that rule without explanation. Va'af al gav de la'achar mikein mesira notza. Here's our question. He was talking about that Lexi, well, we all discussed, but Lexi also ventured an opinion about. She was brave to give an opinion. Here he says, but let's see. Mikan the lachar mikan. In other words, it ubatel. Sorry, again, I have to go back. Ein ze karui RaUya LehitCHabed ubatel. Va'af al gav de la'achar mikan mesirin notza va'or. Even though you fix the meat up and you get it ready to be served, b'kol makom kevan de betchila hit tarvot nitbatlu. Since it was batel then, shuv ein chozrim v'nior. It doesn't chozer v'nior.
Well, this is the opposite.
You're right. It's the opposite case.
It's the opposite question.
You're right. It is. But we're going to see, there is a place we're going to see it. So it's not here, but it's in, I think it's in the Shach of the Tas. We'll find it. They're going to say that you're having it both ways. In other words, basically you think of it like this. It's a rabbinic law. So we're going to let you off the hook if at any point, I'll tell you, it's like this. It's like what we saw by Biria. By Biria, we said it wasn't batel, but then I cut it. It got cooked. By getting cooked, it got destroyed. Now it all of a sudden is batel. Why don't we say it was batel then? It was not batel then. The whole Torah is asur. Finished. End of story. You can't do anything. But we said by Biria that if you would cut it, let's say accidentally, you'd accidentally cut it, it would become batel all of a sudden. So we're sort of seeing that if at any point in the stage, it's not, but it's batel, it's batel. Lexi, I don't hear you. My internet's not so good. Is it me or is it Lexi?
Right. It's like I realize that I have a tray of sheep and then I go and shecht all of them. I feel like consistent with that Biria rule, I shouldn't be able to have any of the like sheep stuff. You could argue that somebody else could, or if somebody else didn't know about the sheep mixture, they could have some. But I think the way we talked about the Biria thing, it would make sense consistently.
You're right. You're right. You would be punished. It would be a knas. You're not allowed to mevata. But if it got cut, we're going to see, like, for example, you're making hummus. So you get chickpeas and have bugs in them and you forgot to check them. And now you ground it for the purpose of making hummus. So since you weren't intending to grind the bugs, you were intending to make hummus and there's no other way to do it than to grind it. Therefore, that would not be called mevatli and isur l'chatchila because you're not intending to mevatli, you're intending to make hummus. And it would be mutter, even though before you ground it, the whole tarova was asur. So you see that you can have this concept and they explicitly talk about it in the Shulchan Aruch. If you cut it in half, if you cut the chatichot, or what if they talk about the Shulchan Aruch itself talks about it? What if one of the pieces got cut in half? Can you have that piece? That piece is no longer RaUya LehitCHabed. So the Shulchan Aruch says, sure, you can have it. It's mamanoshach. Either you took one that wasn't the Yisr one and you cut it, in which case for sure you can have it. Or it was the Yisr one which you cut, in which case the Yisr one is now in a RaUya LehitCHabed, so it's batel. Okay, so you're right. I'm sorry. This is not the proof against. This is not the proof that I was looking for, but still worth looking at. Now I want to look also. Oh, we should have a break. I guess we should have a break. Yeah, let's have a break. Let's have a break for like 5 minutes. So we'll come back at 12 after. So before we do the Shulchan Aruch, I want to see one more Beit Yosef. Truth is, we didn't see all of the tour either, but let's see one more Beit Yosef. It's Beit Yosef Bet. Everyone sees that? It starts off Dafka She'isr Machmat Atzma. Yeah. Now it seems like an obvious din. Seems like a very obvious din. If it's just absorbed, then obviously, like we read, the absorbed elements are not RaUya LehitChabed. So it has to be Isser Atzma. And he says, Ma shetzarich lefaresh davar zeh. So why did he have to tell us this thing so explicitly? B'din haticha RaUya LehitChabed hu lefi sheRaUya svira le da afilu ein isur machmat atzmo ela machmat shekibla tam isur yesh lo din haticha RaUya LehitChabed. K'dekitav b'Mordechai. So we have a posek, a serious major posek, the RaUya, who holds that no.
You're in the Bach now, right? Not the Beit Yosef.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep doing. Yeah, I'm sorry. The Bach. Thank you, Joel, for clarifying. Everybody is perplexed. Where is he reading? Yeah, I'm in the Bach. Sorry. So I'll read it again. So the Bach bet. He quotes it and he says. מה שצריך לפרש דבר זה בדין haticha RaUya LehitChabed הוא לפי דרביה סביר לידע אפילו אין איסור מחמת עצמה אלא מחמת שקיבלה טעם מאיסר יש לו דין haticha RaUya LehitChabed כדכתב בMordechai. So the Bach says that the RaUya holds that even if it just absorbed a flavor, it's Hanan. Basically, he's holding like, I mean, I would say he's holding like the Rebbeinu Tam. It's really Hanan. But yeah, okay, fine. He's holding like Rebbeinu Tam. But maybe it's not. I'm not sure. I don't. It's always complicated. If these things are talui zeh b'zeh, it might be simple in your mind to think of it as holding like Rebbeinu Tam, but it might be a different reason. So that's the RaUya. Now I want to skip a little bit in the Bach. So in other words, if you're making like a list of opinions, you should know that this opinion, there is this opinion that says, no, it is haticha RaUya LehitChabed. But I don't think anybody paskins like him, so it's not really that important. Now, the next piece of the Bach is katav isser v'heter. You see that? By me, it's a large katav. The word katav. Katav isser v'heter ha'aro. Klal kaf hey din chet. The haticha RaUya LehitChabed. Im kiblatam isser betela. So he holds it is batel if it got tam. Ella de begvina shel goyim katav she'eino betela. But in Gentile cheese, in other words, he says va'afilu stam gvina shel goyim. So in other words, he's saying non-Jewish cheese that we have a gezerah. You're not allowed to eat cheese, even if you have all the ingredients. It's listed 100% cow milk. You're not allowed to eat cheese of a Gentile that was not, under supervision because there's a gezerah. Maybe there's some other milk that got in there. So that's a case of kibel tam, and it should be batel. Kibel tam. It just has the flavor of some other cheese, and the Isser v'heter says, but we don't say that it's batel, it's not batel. And the simple explanation is because there's a gezerah, that it's aser. So it's therefore, once there's a gezerah, it's treated as a haticha of Isser. And therefore, it's not that it's absorbed something. It's true, that's why they made their gezerah, but the gezerah took it out of its mitziut. In other words, if they wouldn't have made a gezerah, I would have, it maybe has something in it, and I maybe would need it out of suffix. Then they needed to they made a gezerah. That gezerah had some effect. That gezerah turned it out of being a suffix into being an actualism. So that's so there's another opinion to have. The Yisra Heter says that cheese of goyim ain't b'teila. So now let's go to Shulchan Aruch. And hopefully, I think we'll spend the rest of the time in Shulchan Aruch. So you're Yavni. When do you read the Shulchan Aruch? From Aleph. But you don't have to translate, I don't think.
חתיכה הראויה להתכבד דינה כבירייה, דאפילו באלף לא בטלה, ואפילו אם היא אסורה בהנאה, כיוון שאם תתבטל הייתה מותרת וראויה להתכבד.
Well, that's like the tour.
Yeah. הגה ואפילו אינה אסורה רק מדרבנן, אינה בטלה, בית יוסף בשם הרמב"ן, ואם הוא ספק אם היא ראויה להתכבד, או אם הוא ראויה להתכבד או לא, אז לינן לכולה, אפילו היא אסורה מדאורייתא.
So wait, that's an important point. So first of all, he says that things that are forbidden rabbinically, actually, like Kvina Shalakum, like we just saw.
Right.
Something that's rabbinically forbidden, that's a good example. Eino batela. It's not batel.
But because the lack of vitul is still a rabbinic thing, then if there's a safek about whether or not.
Right. Well, first of all, the first step is to say, why not just say if it's rabbinic gezerah on gezerah? It's a gezerah. The whole din of Haticha LehitCHabed is d'Rabbanan, and this thing is only asur d'Rabbanan. So how do we have a Rabbanan on a Rabbanan? And the answer is we do. In other words, the whole rule of you don't make a gezerah on a gezerah is you don't make a gezerah on a gezerah. But here they made one gezerah and they made another gezerah, and circumstances come about that the two of them collide. That we have. That doesn't mean that it's not usher. As Ain goes through, we don't make. It's complicated about when to say, but basically the other way of saying it is sometimes they do make a gezerah on a gezerah. But it's not really gezerah and a zerah. They made one gezerah that the cheese is aser, and they made another gezerah that anything that's aser is not batel if it's RaUya LehitCHabed. Anything, including rabbinic yisur. I mean that's the way you have to say it. Joel, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say gezerah. They don't build, but they do combine to somehow. But
that's what I was saying. That's what I was trying to say. I mean, I'm not sure if that I didn't go through all of Shas and make sure that works out, but I think that's right.
I think it's not a good klal in general, but that it doesn't hold up. So
I think if you come up with a rule that makes it make sense. I think you can, but it may take some work. And then he says v'im hu safek. That's what you were getting at, Yavni. In other words, if it's d'Rabbanan, it's going to be asur. But what if it's a safek and it's, not if it's d'Rabbanan, any safek. It doesn't have to be d'Rabbanan now. Ve'im hu safek im hi RaUya LehitCHabed or lo. So in other words, what?
Because that part is d'Rabbanan.
What would that case be?
It's a chaticha. It's a chaticha of like a deoraita prohibition like nevela, but we're not sure if the chaticha is RaUya LehitCHabed.
How would that be? I mean, there's two possible ways that could be, or more, at least two.
Well, this is the case of your.
We haven't been sure about, like, that's what we've been debating, right?
Well, it could be right. The piece is we don't know if it's big enough to be RaUya LehitCHabed. It's on the borderline, maybe. That would be one thing. That would almost be a suffix in din, though. So I don't like to say that. We did see that. Can you think of a case that wouldn't be a suffix in din at all?
What do you mean by a suffix in din?
In other words, I just don't know what the din of this piece is. I don't know if this piece is called RaUya LehitCHabed or not. Maybe you're just an ignoramus. In other words, maybe go to a chacham and he'll tell you. The fact that you don't know is a suffix in din. It's not. You see what I'm saying? It's not. It doesn't necessarily make. That's not necessarily called a suffix. Because maybe an expert would know. Go to Martha Stewart and she'll tell you if that's RaUya LehitCHabed or not. She'll tell you for sure, one way or the other.
Could this be a reason to take the lenient side of the machlokot we've been looking at about whether, what counts as, the question of, is a full animal count, or does it count if it's not cooked yet, or does it count if?
Well, that is the direction of the Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. But not the Ramah. The Ramah, that's later. That's. I don't think that's what he's saying here. I think the simple case is you have a piece that fell in and you don't know what size it was. You don't even know the size of it.
Okay.
In other words, somebody told you that one of the pieces in your room, one of the pieces, how do I say? In other words, you served kids portions and adult portions. And you know that one of those steaks, going back to our example of the steaks on the barbecue, let's say, you had kids, and one of the steaks was treif. But you don't know if it was a kid's portion or adult's portion. You just don't know. The adult portions are for sure RaUya LehitCHabed. The kids' portions are for sure not. You don't know which one it was, because your neighbor brought over a piece of steak and put it on your grill, your non-Jewish neighbor, and you just don't know what piece he put on your grill. So and it could have been a small one. I think that would be the simple case. If you know which piece it was, you just don't, and go to ask Martha Stewart. See, I'm dated. I don't know anything since the 90s. Okay. Let's go on. Yavni.
אין לדין חתיכה הראויה להתכבד, אלא אם כן איסורה מחמת עצמה, כגון נבלה ובשר בחלב, אבל אם נאסרה מחמת שקיבלה טעם מאיסור ולא היה בה 60 לבטלו, אפילו למי שסובר חתיכה עצמה נעשית נבלה, אין לדין חתיכה הראויה להתכבד.
So he's saying clearly it's nothing to do with Hanan. He's saying even for you, Mr. Ramah, who hold Hanan B'Shar Yisurim, you have to agree with me that here there's no din. And that's not like the RaUya that we just saw. Right?
Against that.
I say not like, that's against the RaUya.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, now read the Ramah.
ואפילו חתיכה שלא נמלכה בטלה, דאין איסורה מחמת עצמה, רק מחמת דם הבלוע בה.
Right. In other words, when you didn't salt the meat, so you didn't remove the usher blood, but the meat is kosher. Really, it's essentially kosher meat. It's just got some mixed in with some non-kosher blood. Actually, it's even worse than that, because, well, of course, it's also where it's cooked, right? It had to be cooked. It was not salted and it was cooked, so the blood would be usher, right? If we're not learning blood, but the laws of blood. The truth is, blood is only forbidden when it's cooked.
Yeah.
You don't have to. If you eat meat raw, if you want to eat meat raw, you do not have to salt it.
Oh.
So actually, if it would be raw, then they wouldn't even need to say this. But anyway, it's talking about cooked.
Right. כל חתיכה שלא נאסרה רק כדי קליפה, בטלה דהרי הקליפה אינה ראויה להתכבד.
Now, this is a different thing. This is a different thing where he's talking about, not that it's the whole thing is usher, but we're going to learn this later, where there are cases where just the outer surface of the meat becomes usher. For example, you're salting something together with kosher and non-kosher pieces are salted together. Like, I don't know, not beef, but like nevela beef and shchita beef are salted together. So the flavor may transmit between them. The salt may act as a heating element, but only kidei klipa. So why does he say this? Isn't the klipa always going to be something that absorbed? Isn't that included in? Shouldn't that be subsumed in the previous din?
Could it be a case of basar v'chalav? Can that give you a klipa?
Yes, you'd have to say like that. Yes, I think that is going to be the correct answer. It has to be that.
The shop's answer, at least.
Well, we can go with the shach. So it has to be that, because if it would be just a case, like I said, of salting, then it would be just absorbed. So it has to be a case of where it's iser atzmos, basar b'chalav, like, for example, you left something for 24 hours in milk. You left some meat 24 hours in milk. That's also pickling it. There's only kidei klipa maybe. Or klisheni, something like that. Or irua, you poured on it. Whatever, the different cases we'll discuss later, hopefully. So there it's iser atzmo. So in such a case, he says what? Ain't a RaUya LehitCHabed, because the klipa isn't RaUya LehitCHabed. So maybe you could think of a case where, like, you had a large piece of pastrami where a klipa of it is aser, and you could slice that klipa off and serve it. It's a RaUya LehitCHabed. Maybe it would be aser. In other words,
it's a really nice klipa.
If it's a really nice klipa. But again, the klipa, even though it's aser atzmo, it's not enough. All right, gimel.
תרנגולת בנוצתה שנתערבה באחרות בטלה, שהרי אינה ראויה להתכבד לפני האורחים כמות שהיא, ואף על פי שאחר שנתערבה הסירו הנוצה, וכן לא חשיבה ראויה להתכבד, אלא אם כן היא, וכן לא חשיבה ראויה להתכבד, אלא אם כן היא מבושלת, וכן אלא אם כן היא מבשלת, וכן כבש שלם או חתיכה גדולה יותר מדי, לא חשיבה ראויה להתכבד, שאין דרך ליתן לפני העורך כבש שלם או חתיכה גדולה יותר מדי, ויש חולקים בכל זה.
So wait a second, how does he paskin? Paskins, in other words, what about raw animal?
It can be battled.
Right. What about large animal?
It can be battled. If you have a lot of other large animals.
Who's he pasking like?
I guess you don't even need, you just need also. Who's he pasking like? The, not like the Rosh, but like the Rashba.
Exactly. I think I agree with that. Everybody else agrees with me? Yeah, he's passing like the Rashba, not like the Tur, essentially. Because the Tur is passing like his father.
Right.
So, and why is that? I think one of the commentaries says, basically the reason he's passing like is because it's an Issur D'Rabbanan, and we have Machloket Poskim. So paskin like the more lenient ones, Issur D'Rabbanan. The whole idea of Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed is Issur D'Rabbanan, so we'll be more lenient. So therefore, if it's raw, by the way, what's the svara for raw? And what's the svara for gedola? Does it think about the words Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed?
It's that it's not it's not like we were saying that it's not suited for putting before a guest. Am I? Yeah.
Yeah, but I want to know, can you get out of either of those two words? Can you choose two words? One proves that it has to be mevushal, and one proves it has to be katan.
Oh, if it's a whole animal, it's not a chaticha, and if it's raw, it's not RaUya.
It's not RaUya. It has to be a chaticha. That means it has to be cut. And RaUya, it has to be ready. can't be raw.
I
just thought it's
right. I would suggest that even if it's not cut currently, like if you would serve a full fish, like a small fish, then it would still get, even though it's called Haticha. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Haticha is really an essential part of the definition that it'd be.
Well, right. The opinion that how would you translate Haticha if you held that? Well, actually, you're going to see that later. There's another opinion, where's the Taz that says that little pieces. The Taz says if you have little pieces and they're all mixed together, it's a Taz here. It's Taz Yud. Look at Yud here. I'll read the Yud here. Look at Taz Yud. He says, we didn't get there yet, but let's look at it. Be'isr v'hetra aruch sham, be'gilya mevi, de'im nechtacha or shel avaz l'ritzuot. If you cut up the or of the duck, of the goose, into strips, b'teila chashivuto. It's butter, because it's small. V'tamar rashal, and the Rashal was surprised by this. Sham, kevan she'im nechtecha eno chashuva me'ezet tzad tehe chashuva b'shlemuto. If when it's cut, it's not, which is when you're going to use it. Why would it not be? Why would you say it is chashuv when it's full? V'gam lanias daiti yifale. It's also strange to me. Ipcha. The ikar kibud beor ha'avaz acher shehotchin oto l'chatichot. The way you serve it is in small pieces. In other words, he's going a step further. It has to be a man. I would say he translates it's chaticha, meaning a manna. It has to be the way you would serve it, a serving. Nobody would serve, a one large piece of this, it might be like, what could it be? We would have, pastrami. Nobody would give you a large, thick piece of pastrami. You're supposed to serve it sliced. That's the way it's supposed to be. So 7 slices of pastrami might be a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, says the Taz, because that's the way you serve a person salami, even though it's sliced. You don't serve him a thick, fat piece of pastrami. Now, if you look, there's a bet there at the end of this Taz, and that takes you to the Kudat HaKesef, which is the Shach. And he says, and the Taz there said at the end, V'ein lahakel b'zeh, which means he's saying, I'm holding, even if it's cut, don't be makel. It's called Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed if that's the way you serve it. And 100% go like the behavior of people. And he says, Ve'efshar lahakel. So the Shach says, no, you can be makel. Da'ha'ein mechabdin b'chaticha achat to genet, ela b'chatichat harbe. Im kein kol haticha v'haticha atzma eino RaUya LehitCHabed. If that's the case, then each haticha and haticha is not RaUya LehitCHabed. And therefore, according to the Shach, you'll never have a haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, this food. It has to be cut. If it's whole, you don't serve it that way. So it wouldn't be RaUya. And if it's cut, it's not the right size. So he says you can always be making. But the Taz brings up this, he goes in the extreme direction of saying, just go by how you serve it, like potato chips. If it's you serve a person a bowl of potato chips. Joel, you want to say something? No. All right. So let's turn back because there's because I asked Noam to prepare a little explanation of this discussion. We discussed briefly cheese, whether it's batel or not, and.
Can I ask a quick question about the Rama right here that we didn't quite get to?
Yeah, okay, we didn't get to the Rama, yeah.
The v'chen nohagin, is that saying chen nohagin like the people who disagree? Like the yesh cholkim? Okay.
Yesh cholkim b'zeh, yeah. Now, let me read the Rama before we get to, he says, v'yesh cholkim b'kol zeh, v'ken nohagin, as we are cholek, and we hold like the Rosh, like the Rosh. Except milvad tarnagol v'notzata the mechuseret maaseh gadol. Except for a chicken in its feathers, which is really not RaUya LehitCHabed because it needs a lot of processing. It needs a maaseh gadol. What about today when they have machines that do it in 3 seconds? So it might not apply today. I mean, nobody plucks a chicken in their house. The only time you would ever have a chicken in Isnosata is in a factory, and in the factory they have machines. So
more so then.
What?
I mean, it's even more so then. Could go either way.
No, so it's I saying what? What's more so?
Because you're even less likely to serve that to a guest,
No, but remember the Ramah is saying, I hold, says the Ramah, even if it's raw, even if it's a big cow, even if it's if it's give me a half a cow, if it's as long as it's not in its leather, if it's been stripped of its skin, then it's not mechusar ma'aseh gadol. It just needs to be chopped up. So that whole half of a cow, if you mixed it up with other half of cows and you don't know which one is, that's called RaUya LehitCHabed. It's even bigger. He goes like he's totally machmir like the Rosh. Not like the Rashba. So a chicken, in its feathers, he gives an exception. There we can be lenient. The nog, he says, milvad tarnagolet benosotat b'chusar maaseh gadol the nogim ba shehi betela. It's always funny to me, nogim ba. In other words, it happened so often that he had a minhag, that he knows the minhag. It's happened so often that there was chickens in their feathers, that one was treifa and one was not, and they didn't know which one was treifa. And we have a minhag. What to do in that case? Okay. Poskim have a minhag. It's like the oral Masorah of the poskim. It happens enough that the poskim know about it. The ken regalim or rosh shelo nechrechu misaran. So they would, I guess, burn off the hair of the head of a sheep or something, and then they would make it. That would be ready to cook it. Like you can't. How do you cook a head of a sheep? You can't get the skin off so easily because it's very tightly on there, I guess. So they would just burn off the fur, and then they put it in the pot and boil it. So I guess I wasn't there, but we can regalim o rosh shelo nichrachu misarein. In other words, those are also called mechuser maaseh gadol. Of course, if you prepared it by burning it, then it wouldn't be mechuser maaseh gadol. But that's an important phrase to know, mechuser maaseh gadol. Aval im kvar nechrachu chashive Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed afilu lo nimlechu adayin. You didn't even do malicha. Malicha is not called a maaseh gadol. Vafilu kevish shalem eino batel. You have a whole sheep. It's not batel because it's all the more so RaUya LehitCHabed. You can cut it off. Miu reglayim shel ofot milvad reglay avaz v'ken reglay behema daka b'medinat elu lo chashivi klal. They're not important. Nobody, serves a chicken foot. Ubatelin v'rosh shel ofot eino chashuv ubatel. And also a chicken head is not important.
It's a toy.
It's a toy.
I was just
Okay.
about to...
So now I'd like to get into this question of cheese, because maybe it's not that important, but I think it is. There, I'll leave it to Noah.
Great. So we're not necessarily going to read inside. I'm going to share something on the screen because I think the Taz as formulated is needlessly long and complicated. So we're just going to hit the highlights. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, everyone can see this? Amazing. Yeah. So we're essentially going to be dealing with 2 types of cheeses. The second one is just forbidden cheese in general. And then the first one is Gvinat Akum, which, as we saw in the Bach, has some sort of gezerah on it. So the question that is motivating the Taz here is, what do we do with Gvinat Akum? Potentially otherwise perfectly kosher cheese, but that was in the possession of a non-Jew. What are we to do with it? And the case that he presents is cheese that was potentially mixed in with chalav that was trefa, and then once you have that cheese, it was then mixed in with a bunch of cheese that was definitely kosher. So the question is, do we have to consider that cheese RaUya LehitCHabed, and if so, then the entire now mixture of cheese is messed up, or can it be batel? So as we saw in the Bach right here, the Yisur V'Heter says that it is RaUya LehitCHabed, and there's nothing you can do. And as Rav Nachum said, based on the Bach, it's because, well, once the rabbi said that had a gezerah and said that non-Jewish cheese is considered asor, then it's as if it is inherently asor, even though we don't know that, even though we know that's not true, because we're really concerned about a potential of balua. But because the sages said that it's going to be asor, we say it asor. And the reason we know that it's only a case of balua is because we're not actually concerned about tame milk by itself creating cheese. Tame milk doesn't. Milk that is just tame can't create cheese. The only question is whether you have kosher milk that had a little bit of tame milk in it, in which case it can still become cheese. So this is just so far just review. So that's the Yisur V'Heter and the Bach as we saw. But we're going to see the Bach in a second. The next piece that the Taz does is he quotes the Ramah, but not the Ramah here. It's a Ramah in the Darchei Moshe. And the Ramah says, nope, it's not RaUya LehitCHabed. This cheese would be batel. And his explanation is I think the simplest. It's a case of balua. And as we've seen time and time again, in a case of balua, we don't say Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. So that is the Ramah's position. So far it makes sense. The Yisur V'Heter and the Bach on the one hand say, once the sages say that there's a gezerah that it's that's asor, we treat it as a real isor. And the Ramah says, well, in the case of balua, it doesn't get to that case, no matter what the sages say. The problem is,
I don't know if I wouldn't say it that way. I would say it a little bit different. I would say that we know the reason for the gezerah, and the reason for the gezerah is because we're worried about tarovet. So therefore, we assume that there's a tarovet here. So
I'm interested that these sources are assuming that the gzera is because of the tamei milk, when in fact a lot of the Rishonim don't. There's like a bunch of reasons proffered as to what the gzera on Gvina is, like Avodat Kochavim or Nikor, stuff like that. So it's interesting to me that they were working off the assumption that it's the tamei milk that's the concern here.
Right. So most of the posts, you're right. There are a lot of reasons offered. And the Gemara, I mean, most of the poskim understand the Gemara as concluding that this is the final reason.
Really? Because I know like the Tosfot think like that it's Nikor and that there isn't any actual reason for Gvina anymore. I think actually a lot of the Ashkenazi Rishonim think that it's not.
Doesn't the Tosfos talk about bubbles of milk that are still there?
So that's only like basically they say, yeah, well, we heard about some people occasionally use like pig fat on the outside of their milk, but they don't think that the bubbles are a problem because it would just be from like the keva of the animal.
Well, there's two different things. One is a worry about milk being mixed together, and one is a worry that they made it with the keva, which is the milk of the stomach.
But there's like
of the calf.
The like Rabbeinu Tam at least ends up saying that like if it weren't for the gzera / the fact that people have the gzera was because of Nikor, and if it weren't for the fact that people have been like operating with a like Isser regarding Gvina, it would literally like be fine, but that you shouldn't do it because some place where nikor is still a concern, people will come to eat it.
Okay, maybe you'll present a talk on that. It's not in our subject matter actually, for the year, but maybe you'll present something. But you are correct in observing that these poskim are understanding it. The Taz and others are understanding it as being as fundamentally a problem of milk, of tamei milk mixed together. So let's assume that for continuing. But I was just saying that I think the rationale that the Taz is giving is that at worst it's a tarovet. That's all the Chazal said, is that it is a tarovet, even though it's a safek, we're going to consider it like a vadai tarovet. And tarovet shouldn't be worse than any other tarovet, which is balua. Balua is a tarovet. But go ahead. But yeah.
That's the Ramah, right. So then we get back to the Bach, and I don't think we read this in the Bach, but the Taz quotes him, his father-in-law, in saying, well, the Ramah doesn't make sense because the Ramah in a different place in the Darchei Moshe contradicts himself. And he says, "Gvina shel oved kochavim lo mahane safek sveka kevan she'istor migufa." So I don't necessarily think it's so worth to get into the different types of svekot here, but the point is that the Ramah in this other place seems to indicate that we treat cheese as an isor megufa, which is the exact same rationale as the isor veheter. And so the Bach continues to argue. So if in one place the Darchei Moshe says one thing, and in another place he seems to indicate that it is RaUya LehitCHabed, we're going to go with the rationale of the Isur V'Heter, who is actually clear on the matter. So that's another reason why the Bach says that it's a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. Now the Taz, and this is the end of the first main portion of the Taz sort of went through all these arguments, and he finally goes back to defend the Ramah, and paskins like that first understanding of the Ramah, that it's not a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. Because when the Ramah in the second case that the Bach cited, he says, "De'afal pi shenesru al gvinot ovdei kochavim misafek mikra vadai isor kevan shechachamim asru mikoach safek deoraita." That is dealing with an entirely different case. That is dealing with the case of actual gvina isor, cheese that we know for in fact is going to be prohibited, and that once the sages created that gezerah, that is when we get into the territory of we're not paying attention to the sveka, because right. This is similar to the rationale of the Isur V'Heter, but it's not talking about RaUya LehitCHabed. And that's sort of the chiluk that the Taz makes between the Darchei Moshe's opinion. In this first case, it's dealing dafka with RaUya LehitCHabed, and that's why he goes Eino. But here it's dealing with an entirely different case, that we're just dealing with the gvina of the ovdei kochavim in front of us, and not necessarily getting into contact with RaUya LehitCHabed. So that's how the Taz ends up. Just really briefly, we don't really need to walk through it, but the other main case that the Taz brings is he sort of gives a machloket with the Rashal. So whereas this first case we discussed was Gvinat Akum, here we're dealing with cases that is actually Gvina that we know is forbidden. So we're not dealing with the Gezerah, we know 100% it is forbidden. So I know I wrote the Taz first, but we're actually going to first take a look at the Rashal. So he actually considers 100% Gvina, forbidden Gvina.
Why is this Gvina forbidden? Is it because it's made from the stomach of a nevela?
Because it is without a doubt considered right here. We know for a fact that the chalav of a treifa went into creating this milk.
In other words, it's vadai treifa milk, right?
Right. So I would
treifa in the sense. By the way, you have to be medayek in treifa. Treifa means a cow that had a hole in its lung or a hole in its heart. Treifa.
Right.
In other words, it's not dehemeya, not behemoth demeya, because that doesn't make cheese. It's
Correct.
a treifa. It's a cow with a hole in its heart or lungs or something.
Right, and that's the distinction between the first case we were discussing and the second case, because when the rabbis made their gezerah, they were worried about a little bit of tameh milk getting in. Here we're dealing with treifa milk. So the Rashal says we don't consider that RaUya LehitChabed for two reasons. First of all, if the milk was wet, or if the cheese was wet, well, then it's definitely not chashuva. No one wants to serve that. That's definitely not RaUya.
By wet, he means like cottage cheese.
Yeah, it's slippery. It's the only cheese that you're actually going to consider RaUya LehitChabed is really nice cheese that you're gonna get from a cheesemaker or from a restaurant, not the stuff that falls apart in your hands. Like cream cheese is not RaUya LehitChabed. It's too wet, right? And then he adds, even if we're dealing with the really nice fancy cheese, we would say that, which he calls kasher, we would consider it not to be RaUya LehitChabed. That's because people don't actually get satisfied by it because it's harmful for the body. So I think this is like a nice move where, like, outside of health concerns, gvina that is kasha, gvina that kasha would be actually RaUya LehitChabed, but because of the actual health issues that would happen, those are out. So that's the Rashal's position. And finally, the Taz sort of rebuts this. But doesn't really rebut it. He gives a different rationale, and he ends up in saying that is RaUya LehitChabed, and he goes back and forth. So he starts off with his conclusion and says that it is RaUya LehitChabed, but then he says, wait a minute, we don't actually have to say that because look, we know the majority of animals are not actually treifot, so then we don't have to be RaUya LehitChabed. But then he goes back and says, but maybe we do need to be concerned that we are actually dealing with an issue of basar b'chalav, in which some of the flesh of the animal or the skin of the animal of the keva was inserted into the cheese making process. In which point, as we learned before, basar b'chalav is always RaUya LehitChabed, and that's sort of where he ends up. Though he does have this nice caveat in the end, where if we can ascertain with 100% certainty that we're not dealing with an issue of basar b'chalav, we can actually say that's not RaUya LehitChabed, but our a priori assumption is that it is RaUya LehitChabed. That's the Taz.
So, what is the din of cheese made from a stomach of a nevela?
Cheese made from the
kevat nevela, it's aser. If it's kevat nevela, most say it's fine.
No, as far as whether it's Haticha RaUya LehitChabed.
As far as what's RaUya.
In other words, cheese made nevela is cheese made from the meat of a nevela. Now, use the enzyme for the cheese, just the dvar mami, from a nevela. So, is that called a Haticha RaUya LehitChabed if it mixed together,
like,
or can it be butter?
According to the Taz, it is.
Because
like, the dvar hama'amid is not batel, but it wouldn't make sense, I feel like, to say that cheese is then because of that a Haticha RaUya, because that's really going multiple steps there.
well, there's a machlokas between the Taz and the Rabbi Akiva Eger.
Right. The Taz says that it is RaUya LehitChabed because it's got the din of basar b'chalav. Right.
So look at Gimel. Just let me take you there. Look at the
That's
very
only
last.
if there's malicha, isn't it? Like, we don't think there's basar b'chalav as the din there unless there was maliach in the stomach.
You say you need heat to be basar b'chalav.
Yeah, that, like, they
salt.
say there's concern about basar b'chalav because they often would like salt the stomachs while the milk was inside of it, and then we're worried about it. But if it wasn't salted, then
let's
we
look
don't
at the
think
Taz.
that.
Let's look at the last line of the Taz, the last two lines. He says, Kemamidim otoba or keva nevela. So you have a keva of you have the lining of the stomach of a nevela. Mikoach ze yesh la din HaRaUya LehitCHabed. It is considered RaUya LehitCHabed. Ki yesh iser basar v'chalav. Ki iser b'chalav yesh kan. Because that's called basar v'chalav because you use the meat of nevela with milk.
It's only if there's tam, though. I mean, we say the same thing when we use
the
So Lexi, you are a follower of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Or he's a follower of you. You're in good company. Look at Rabbi Akiva Eiger Gimel. He says, Hidushe Rabbi Akiva Eiger. He says, V'kashali hala'el mevuar d'v'ma'amid ba'or keva k'sheira is a keva k'sheira. Im yesh shishim b'chalav mutter. It's mutter. Why? Because there's no time of meat there. And the ma'amid is just v'harei.
I mean, that's like straight from the Mishnah. Like that's like mamish straight.
Okay. Harei sha'al yedei ma'amid lo na'aseh basar b'chalav. Ma'amid doesn't make basar b'chalav. You can use the meat of a kosher animal to make cheese because it's just, but when it's a treifa animal, then it's like the treifa animal is here. The treifa animal is here, but it's not basar b'chalav.
Right, that's why it's not usher, right? It's not basar b'chalav. It's just that the nevela is a davar hama'amid, so it's like nevela or whatever. But it's not the same.
Came b'ma'amid ba'or nevela asur rach mishum nevela v'shuv lo have iser machmat atzma. And that wouldn't call it an iser machmat atzmo because you can say, wait a second, you can say, what do you mean? The whole cheese is usher because it's ma'amid. No, but what is going on is that the nevela is really batel. It's really a tiny amount of nevela in this milk. So it's really batel. Why is it not batel? Because it's a varmami. But, so it's not batel. So it's like, what is it? It's a case of balua. It's a case of balua where it's not batel. But what did we say about balua? Balua is mutter. So it should be mutter. So he's not, again, we're not discussing whether cheese is mutter. Obviously, the cheese is usher. But logically, this is a very complicated idea. That the idea is that the ma'amid is a type of balua that is never batel. But it doesn't cause it to become milk and meat. Because from the perspective of milk and meat, derech bishul asra Torah, we say in the Gemara. And that means there has to be tam of the meat in it. But there is no tam of the meat in this cheese. So he argues on the Taz and says that treif cheese would be batel, even if it's a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. Well, there's definitely more to be learned in this sugya.
Well, he gives the Tay roots and then he gives another kasha.
Who does? Oh, the top. Yeah, I just wanted to give you that idea. Wait, you say so? What you're saying in the end, Rabbi Akiva Eiger agrees with the Taz?
No, he gives a provisional Tay roots to his first question and then launches another challenge and ends arguing with him.
Oh, there's a Pitchei Tshuva that we should look at before we go. One important Pitchei Tshuva. I mean, there's other things we didn't do all the seifim. Right. It talks in Vav. Vav is very important. Vav talks about this idea of it becoming broken apart in the cooking process, and we discussed that a little bit in Biria, and he discusses it again here, where there's a machloket about how much it has to be fall apart. And what we said last week was correct, that if it just falls apart because of the cooking process, then it has to actually come to the point where it is, in the words of the Mechaber, ad shenebda tzuratan, if it's totally lost its shape, then it could be batel again. By the way, we see there that it's batel, even though before it wasn't batel. Vav, I'll just read Vav again. Ha de birya v'chaticha RaUya LehitCHabed. He puts them together. Lo batle. Dafka ba'odan shleimim. That's only when they're whole. Aval im nechtechu. That's what I was talking about before. If they got cut, we're not saying who cut it. Obviously, if you cut it intentionally, it'll be forbidden for you. We learned that already. But it got cut. Oh, nit rasku, or they got destroyed by the cooking process. They got turned into resek. You heard of resek agbaniot, they turned into tomato paste. Ad shenebda tzuratan batle. Itu lo chashive, because now they're no longer chashiv. Even though it was usher before, now it becomes mutter again. Va'afilu im nitrasku la'achar shenitarvu im aheter. In other words, exactly spelling out that even though it's already been a mixture, and now they didn't get destroyed before they fell in and then they got destroyed. The Ramah comes in. The Ramah's favorite topic is Noda. And he comes and says, here, don't take my idea of Noda too far. Here, even if it was already Afilu Achar Noda, or even though I knew it was Usser before, it was Usser. I knew that it was there. And then I cooked it. And then it got batal. It's still going to be mutter. V'hu shenitrasek shelo b'mitkaven levaten. That's only if I didn't do it for the purpose of mevatling it. Aval im nitkaven lekach asur. If he tried to make a bittul, then it's asur. Limerasek, to the one who does it. Im hu shelo, like we learned before. V'ken l'mi shenitrasek b'shelo. So if you do it for some other purpose, you just need to finish cooking your food. Your soup is not finished. Or your tchina, your chickpeas need to be ground. So that's not why I'm doing it, and it just happens of itself, but it's mutter. There's a whole big. Then he says, "Ve'ein chiluk bein nitarvu b'mino o shelo b'mino." Whether it doesn't matter whether it's b'mino or not b'mino. Why exactly he says is a complicated question. You can look if you want in the Gra and Siman Kuf Yud, the first Gra there. What exactly this case is, why he's talking about Mino. But I want to look in the minus 5 minutes that we have. I want to look at LehitCHabed that I promised you. Anyway, that Vav is very important, and then LehitCHabed, what letter is it? It's Dalet, but it's not at the beginning. First he quotes a Noda b'Yehuda, Ayin b'Tshuva Noda b'Yehuda, and then he goes on in parentheses, in a bracket actually. He says Ayin b'Tshuvot Chatam Sofer. You see that? Ayin b'Tshuvot Chatam Sofer, Siman Sadi Aleph, shekatav Haticha Gdola. V'gam chaya, itlan rashba, viran, v'ra'a, which means that they are, in other words, like the mechaber. If it's raw, it's not a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, or if it's gedola, it's ein RaUya LehitCHabed. V'la'anias daiti gam harambam. He thinks also the Rambam holds like that. Sfir leika hara'a. That raw is not a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed. V'ken pasach mechaber, and obviously the mechaber also says like that. V'rak maiti yesh cholkim, and he just said there's those that argue. V'katav Ramah sheken noagin. The Ramah said we do like that. V'pri chadash maskim legamrei kedat hamechaber. So the pri chadash, I discussed the pri chadash before once. Pri chadash is a major posek here, and he says he agrees with the mechaber. Not like the Ramah. So we can be making. Al-Kain beheft. So then what does he allow? So the Chatam Sofer is clearly Ashkenazi posek. He should be following the Ramah, which means that everything should be a Haticha RaUya LehitCHabed, even if it's raw, even if it's big. But he says, based on all these opinions, he says, Alkane, behefsed meruba, if it's a hefsed meruba, sarafti od kula acheret, and I want to skip a line, but because I want to get into what this kula was, but in tziruf, we have this concept of tziruf. It has to be a hefsed meruba and also some other reason to be lenient. Saraft, I'm coming to the next word, sarafti. Skip about 15 words. Sarafti lahanal, vehetarti, behefsed meruba ma'od. When it was a great loss, I allowed it. Sha'ala lehefsed kama me'od, that it cost a hefsed of several hundred something or others. I don't know what the hundreds were, presumably not pennies. In other words, so you see, there's a tshuva of the Chatam Sofer that we can be lenient like the Mechaber in a hefsed meruba gadol, b'tziruf hefsed meruba gadol, and he also seems to say b'tziruf other factors. But tziruf is a concept in psak where one reason is not enough to be lenient, but with another, if you have two different angles to be lenient, we can be lenient. All right, so that's it for today. Unless you have questions. No, we'll stop here. I went over a little bit. I think Joel is going to give a review shear. I recommend it highly.
Thank you.
2 o'clock
sure.
on Wednesday.
2 o'clock on Wednesday.
2 o'clock Eastern time.
Which means the same time, 9 o'clock Israel time.
Yeah.
So same time. Okay, guys. Thank you. I'm glad
Thank you.
Sources for next week will be coming out either tonight or tomorrow morning. So that's
Thanks.
Sure.
Great. Good job.
Okay.
Good job.
Good night.